You've been told that psychological healing turns you into something soft, something open, something that radiates unconditional acceptance toward anyone who enters your orbit. That's a soothing lie. Carl Jung spent decades recording what truly happens when an empath integrates their shadow, and the truth is far harsher than the myth allows. A fully integrated empath doesn't become easier to reach. They become operationally dangerous to anyone who confuses awareness with weakness. Not through aggression, through immunity. And that immunity dismantles entire systems of social control that rely on your unconscious cooperation. Let me show you what Jung actually witnessed in the clinical shift from fractured sensitivity to integrated psychological sovereignty. Before integration, the empath lives in what Jung identified as a state of permanent psychic ferocity. Your nervous system runs without filters. You pick up emotional frequencies others can't detect. The tension in a room before anyone speaks, the hostility under polite words, the depression someone carries but never names. This isn't mysticism. It's differentiated perception forged by survival. You learn to read micro-expressions, vocal inflections, and behavioral inconsistencies because your early environment demanded it. Maybe you had a parent whose mood decided whether the day would be safe or chaotic. Maybe you moved through family systems where spoken language contradicted energetic reality. You developed perceptual accuracy the way soldiers develop threat detection, through repeated exposure to environments where missing signals had consequences. But here's what that survival adaptation cost you. As your perception sharpened, your boundaries dissolved, you began to experience what Jung called unconscious participation, the inability to separate your emotional material from the emotional material of everyone around you. You walked into a room and absorbed the collective unconscious content of everyone present, their rage, their grief, their unprocessed trauma. It poured into your system as if it belonged to you. You didn't choose this. Your psyche was built to be receptive, and without proper individuation, receptivity became indiscriminate consumption. You took in other people's shadow material because you had no framework to recognize that their darkness was not yours to hold. The unhealed empath builds an entire identity around that absorption. You believed your purpose was to metabolize other people's pain. You became the family therapist at 12, the friend who always understood at 16, the partner who could hold space for anything at 25. And with each role, you buried yourself deeper beneath layers of borrowed suffering. You had no boundaries because boundaries felt like rejection. You had no limits because limits felt like abandonment. You said yes while your body screamed no. You stayed when every instinct told you to leave. You smiled through your own collapse because you believed your value was measured by how much you could endure that others could not. Jung saw this pattern again and again. The empaths who came to his practice weren't presenting with traditional pathology. They were drowning in psychological material that didn't originate in their own unconscious. They were living repositories for the collective shadow. Everyone's denied aggression, everyone's repressed sexuality, everyone's unacknowledged shame. Consider what this does to your sense of self. When you spend years absorbing external emotional content, you lose contact with your internal reality. You can read everyone except yourself. You can name what others feel, but can't name your own emotional state. You become a finely tuned psychological instrument aimed outward with no capacity for inner calibration. This is the pre-integration condition. Maximum perception, zero protection, total self-abandonment disguised as compassion. Jung understood that most people don't choose individuation. They get driven into it by crisis. For the empath, that crisis usually arrives as betrayal, not ordinary disappointment. Betrayal that shatters your foundational operating system. Usually it's the person you protected most, the one you absorbed pain for, the one you believed would never exploit your openness. And then you discover the truth. They've been lying for years. They've been extracting your empathy like a resource. They never saw you as a person, only as a function they could use. That moment is critical, not because it breaks you, but because it forces a decision that can no longer be postponed. You can keep absorbing, keep explaining away what you know is true, keep overriding your perceptual accuracy to preserve the relationship, or you can trust what you've always known, but refuse to admit. Jung called this the encounter with the shadow, but for the empath, it's more precise. It's the moment you meet your own denied aggression, your buried rage, your capacity for severance, every quality you labeled cruel or selfish or wrong. Those qualities have been waiting in your shadow, and integration requires that you claim them. This is not a gentle process. You don't integrate your shadow through affirmations or neat therapy exercises. You integrate it by acknowledging you've been complicit in your own dissolution. That every time you override your instincts to preserve someone else's comfort, you commit an act of self-violence. The breaking point is when you stop committing that violence. When you look at the person who betrayed you and feel nothing, no urge to fix them, no need to understand them, no impulse to absorb their guilt or shame or justification, only clarity. Cold, precise, unshakable clarity. What follows the breaking point is not what the self-help industry sells as healing. You don't return to openness. You don't become more trusting. You don't soften. You sharpen. Integration means bringing every suppressed quality into conscious operation. Your intelligence, your capacity for ruthless assessment, your willingness to let others fail, your ability to leave without explanation, your skill at spotting manipulation before it fully forms. These aren't dark traits, they're operational necessities you were trained to treat as character flaws, and the moment you stop calling them defects, everything changes. Jung documented 3 distinct stages in this transformation. Each stage builds on the one before it. Each stage demands that you abandon another comforting illusion about who you're supposed to be. Stage 1. The cessation of absorption. The first stage is simple. You stop serving as a container for other people's emotional waste. It sounds obvious, but the mechanism is specific. You develop what Jung called conscious differentiation, the ability to observe emotional content without internalizing it. Someone throws rage at you. Before you absorbed it, wondered what you did wrong, tried to fix what you believed you broke. Now you watch it. You recognize it as their emotional material. You see the projection operating in real time, and you don't take it in. This produces what looks like mirroring, but functions as deflection. Their emotional content rebounds back to them. They're forced to hold what they're trying to offload, and most people can't tolerate that. They escalate. They accuse you of being cold, distant, not who you used to be. They're right. You're not who you used to be. That person was unconscious. This stage collapses guilt manipulation instantly. When someone tries to make you responsible for their emotional state and you simply observe the attempt without accepting the assignment, the entire mechanism fails. They're left holding guilt with nowhere to deposit it, and you watch them struggle with it, unmoved. This isn't cruelty. It's the natural consequence of consciousness meeting unconsciousness. When you stop participating in someone's projection, they're forced to face what they're projecting. Stage 2 introduces something that disturbs people who believe empaths should be universally available. You become selective, aggressively selective. You apply differentiated perception to decide who earns access to your inner world. This is not the same as building walls. Walls are defensive. Selectivity is strategic. You're still capable of profound presence, still capable of holding space for real pain, still capable of deep connection. But now those capacities are reserved for people who demonstrate reciprocal consciousness, people doing their own work, people who respect boundaries without testing them, people who can sit with their own discomfort without making it your burden. For everyone else, you become inaccessible, not hostile, not reactive, simply unavailable. The empath who used to be an open door becomes a threshold with conditions, and those conditions are not negotiable. You don't explain them. You don't defend them. You don't soften them to make others comfortable. You just live from them. This is where the difference between nice and kind becomes operational. Nice is conflict avoidance. kind is clarity. Even when clarity creates discomfort, the integrated empath stops being nice. They become kind in ways most people experience as harsh. Kind enough to let someone face consequences. Kind enough to refuse enabling. Kind enough to say no without apology or explanation. Kind enough to end relationships that survive only through your self-abandonment. This selectivity isn't fueled by judgment, it's fueled by pattern recognition. You've watched how certain personality structures operate. You know the trajectory. You can predict outcomes because you've watched the same sequences unfold across dozens of relationships. You don't need months to see whether someone is operating with integrity. You know within the first 3 interactions, not through intuition in the mystical sense, but through data, through the massive unconscious database you've been building since childhood. Stage 3 is the one that would genuinely unsettle you if you understood its implications. Because by this point, you've become what Jung called psychologically differentiated to a degree most people never reach. You're not just empathic, you're predictive. Think about what you've actually been doing all these years. Every time you absorbed someone's emotional state, you logged data. Every time you read a room, you catalogued patterns. Every time you sensed intent before someone acted on it, you were building a predictive model of human behavior. The unhealed empath collected all of that data and then felt guilty about using it. You second-guessed your assessments. You told yourself you were being judgmental when your instincts flagged danger. You overrode your internal warning system because overriding it felt more compassionate. But the integrated empath trusts that database completely. When every part of your system signals deception, you don't need external validation. You don't need proof. You already know, and you move accordingly. This is what makes the healed empath operationally dangerous. You see the game before it begins. Someone sits across from you, and within seconds, you know. You know they're lying about where they were. You know they're about to make a request designed to obligate you. You know they're setting up manipulation several moves ahead. You know because you've seen this exact sequence before. Micro-expressions don't lie. Vocal patterns don't lie. Behavioral rhythms don't lie. This is differentiated perception at full operational capacity. You're processing psychological and emotional information at a level most humans never develop. You have a framework forged through years of survival necessity that now functions like a sophisticated detection system. And here is the critical element that separates the integrated empath from the manipulator. You could use this knowledge destructively. You understand manipulation mechanics better than many narcissists. You know which vulnerabilities to exploit, which fears to trigger, which wounds to target. You hold the full blueprint, and you choose not to deploy it. Jung spent considerable time examining why some people integrate power benevolently, while others weaponize it. He concluded the difference is conscious ethical choice. The integrated empath makes a daily decision to use their abilities for protection, not domination. You see the shortcuts. You recognize that your understanding of human psychology gives you unfair advantages in nearly every interaction, and you refuse to take them. Not because you lack capacity, but because you've developed something more advanced than tactical skill. You've developed integrity. This is what Jung meant by individuation. You've integrated both light and shadow. You can hold profound compassion and ruthless precision at the same time. You can be gentle or severe depending on what the moment requires. You're no longer trapped in one mode of being. When you complete this integration, something happens that reaches beyond your individual psychology. You create a ripple effect that forces everyone near you to evolve or reveal themselves. Family systems built on dysfunction cannot survive your transformation, not because you attack them, but because you stop being the structural support that kept the dysfunction standing. When you remove the person who always absorbed tension, who always smoothed conflict, who always sacrificed themselves to maintain a false peace, the entire system must reorganize. And that reorganization exposes what was always true, but never spoken. Your alcoholic father can't keep drinking without consequences because you're no longer cleaning up the wreckage. Your codependent mother can't avoid her own therapy by using you as her emotional processor. Your narcissistic ex can't control you through guilt because you've stopped regulating their emotions for them. The empath who enabled all of it is gone, and in their place stands someone who values their own peace more than they value avoiding conflict. Some relationships deepen. The people who respect your transformation, who feel inspired instead of threatened, who begin doing their own work. Those connections become more real than they ever were. But others disintegrate, and they disintegrate loudly. The people who benefited from your unconsciousness will rage. They'll recruit allies. They'll build narratives where you're the problem. Because if you're the problem, they don't have to change. This is where your real power shows. You don't defend yourself. You don't explain. You don't try to convince anyone of your worth. You observe. You watch people reveal their true nature through their reactions. And you make decisions based on what you observe. Not with anger, not with bitterness, with clarity. This is conscious participation. You engage reality as it is, not as you wish it were. You see people clearly. You accept them as they are. And you choose relationships based on that clear seeing. No more potential. No more hoping people will change. No more sacrificing yourself for connections that drain instead of nourish. What you become after full integration is what Jung called the individuated self. Someone who descended into their own darkness, integrated what they found there, and emerged with capacities most people never develop. You're no longer terrified of profound loss because you've already lost the version of yourself that needed to be everyone's savior. You can release anyone who doesn't align with your truth, and that freedom makes you magnetic to conscious people and repulsive to unconscious ones. Your sensitivity isn't a weakness. It never was. It was a sophisticated perceptual system waiting to be fused with boundaries, wisdom, and self-trust. You aren't less sensitive now. You're consciously sensitive. And that consciousness turns sensitivity from vulnerability into tactical advantage. You can feel everything and still keep sovereignty. You can see the worst in humanity and still choose engagement on your terms. You can be powerful and peaceful at the same time. This is the truth Jung documented, and the truth most people misread. Healing doesn't mean going back to who you were before the pain. You can't go back. That version was unconscious. The integrated version is far more capable. You're awake, you're whole. You own every part of yourself, the compassion and the capacity for immediate severance, the gentleness and the steel, the openness and the impenetrable boundaries. You're not too much for this world. You're exactly what conscious evolution requires. Someone who can hold space for darkness without being consumed. Someone who can love deeply without losing themselves. Someone who can see through deception while keeping their integrity intact. The unhealed empath asks why this is happening to them. The integrated empath knows it happened to forge you into something that cannot be manipulated, cannot be guilt-tripped, cannot be dragged back into unconscious patterns. You were never meant to save everyone. You were meant to save yourself. And in doing so, become proof that integration is possible. This is the transformation Jung observed. Not a return to innocence, but an advance into sovereignty. You're conscious, integrated, and operationally untouchable to anyone who mistakes your awareness for availability. You don't argue. You don't defend. You don't prove anything to anyone. You simply see the pattern, make the assessment, and act accordingly, usually by walking away so quietly they barely notice you've left. No drama, no explanation, just absence. This is what a healed empath becomes. Not nicer, not more accommodating, not more open. They become sovereign, self-possessed, unshakable in their knowing, immovable in their boundaries, immune to unconscious manipulation. They become love with operational precision, compassion with strategic deployment, empathy with absolute self-respect, and that combination is one of the most formidable forces in human psychology. You understand now what took years to learn. Protecting your peace isn't selfish. It's the only sane response to a world that will consume you if you let it. Walking away from toxicity isn't weakness. It's the highest form of self-regard. Choosing yourself isn't cruelty. It's the foundation of every healthy relationship you will ever build. When you make that choice, when you decide your psychological integrity matters more than other people's comfort, the frequency shifts. People who drained you start avoiding you. Situations that depleted you stop appearing. Drama that used to trail you everywhere can no longer find you. Not because you're hiding, because you're operating at a level where unconscious behavior can't reach you, where manipulation slides off like water off stone, where guilt trips land in empty space because you're no longer standing in the target zone. This is your inheritance, not the ability to feel everything, the wisdom to choose what deserves to be felt, not the capacity to help everyone, the discernment to invest only in those doing their own work, not endless patience, the strength to walk away when patience becomes self-abandonment. Your breaking point was your initiation. Your sensitivity is your instrument. Your empathy is your advantage. And now that you wield it consciously, you are unreachable by anyone operating from unconsciousness. This is what Jung meant by individuation. This is what a healed empath actually becomes.